And we're live. It's Friday. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing really well, thanks. Yeah, it is Friday. Yep, it's finally sunny. It finally feels like summer's begun. It's we'll hopefully find a patio later, and yeah, so this is good. Lifted the spirits for sure.
Absolutely. Oh, awesome. Cool. Well, we're a little late today because someone had to eat. how, how dare I need to eat? What are these conditions?
Mhm.
Slackery. But
Yeah.
anyway, we're here and it's Friday. So what does that mean?
Yes, FAQ Friday. So please, if you have any burning questions through the week and you want them answered, drop them into the comments and we will get to them on today's live. And as always, I just want to use the group. Use the group. I mean, post things in there, post questions in there. I mean, we don't have to wait till Friday. We can get to them kind of through the week too if there's anything that's pressing. And certainly if you know the answer, feel free to jump in with a comment with your own experience too. So get some back and forth going too. So, but anyway, yes, for today's FAQ Friday, if you've got any questions, drop them into the comments, and I'll just go through some of the questions that I've had from sellers during the week.
Mm-hmm.
Anything to add on top of that before we get started?
No, sounds good.
Okay. So, as the first question has to do with the team that people have. Now, when we say team, I mean, this could come in the form of like, project workers or, contractors, freelancers, whatever. But some people also have part-time or full-time employees under them. And the question was, in the event of a sale, does anybody working in the business need to sign anything official, like in a way of a contract? And I think where they're going with this question is that if the seller, if the buyer wants to keep the team in place, do the team need to like sign a contract saying that they're going to stay on for the 6 months or the 12 months or whatever? Like, is there anything official that has to happen when it comes to, I guess we'll talk specifically with like employees of the brand, like that's the thing. If the buyer wants to keep them, is there something that they get them to sign to protect themselves from people just quitting as soon as the sale happens or whatever? What do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a good question. So it depends the intent behind this question, but let's deal with full-time employees. So if it's in the US, it's a W-2 employee. Elsewhere, they have an employment contract. So if the buyer wants the staff, they will have to sign another contract. It's very rare for someone to be able to tie up an employee for a certain period of time, right? So if they're saying, well, will my employees need to stay on for 6 months? It's up to the buyer. They might not even want the staff. We've had deals before where the buyer said, look, at close, we don't want anyone, and that's your problem. And there were W-2 employees in place, so they had to prepare for that ahead of time before selling the business. So it really depends on the business, depends on the buyer more importantly. So what those employees do, how long they've been there, do they want to keep them, are they bringing their own team? Generally speaking, we want employees, contractors, freelancers, service providers, anyone that's running the business to continue maintaining the business. That's typically what a buyer would want, but it depends. But if it's specifically, are they going to be locked up for a period of time? Maybe, but I haven't actually seen that. I've seen employment contracts.
Yeah, of course, the employment contracts would be like, here are the duties that you're going to perform, and if you don't, here's the repercussions. But I mean, you can't force somebody to stay. You like the owner of the business there would be money that would be contractually obligated to pay if the owner will stay into that transition period of 6 months to 3 months or 8 months to a year, whatever they decide is the right transition period. But employees can quit whenever they want. There's no, they sign the,
They're employees. That's the deal.
they sign a contract saying that, I agree to perform these duties while I'm an employee of the business, and I, carry myself in, a certain manner, or whatever, those kind of things. But you can't say that your employees have to stay in the business or else you don't get paid. That you can't really sort of facilitate that, because employees can come and go as they please. If they want to quit and not perform those duties anymore and not get paid, then that's their prerogative. You can't really force that to happen, I don't think, in any of the Western world.
So there's a couple other pieces to that. You might want to put, or you definitely want to put SOPs in place, and you can have your staff do this so they're replaceable and they could train someone else. So you could say, the employment contract might say, if you leave, you agree to train the next person within X amount of time or something. But what they're getting at here is, if people leave after the sale, what's my liability? And that's all negotiable. But I'd try and mitigate that by having SOPs in place, having some backup plan. If that was the case, I've not seen it being the case, but SOPs definitely. But yeah, they now control the business. It's the same as if a month or two later they 10x revenue, or the revenue drops in half. That's there for the most part, unless it's something that you've done. They're in control of that now, so that's their running operation.
Yeah. If I was a seller and there was any money on the table that required my employees to stay in, or I don't get the money, that's not a contract I would sign. That's not a purchase agreement that I would sign. I'll do my part. I'll control what I can control. But if the employees are not comfortable with the new owner and they don't want to go with the business, that's completely up to them. But
what I have seen before is, relating to employees, is a lot of the companies we deal with are really lean. So they only have a few key people and some contractors. What I have seen be part of the game plan of the sale and worked into the deal is to build out corporate infrastructure. So be in charge of hiring people, replacing themselves, so that in 2 or 3 years, this is not very common, but in one particular case, it was to replace them and move on. They were retaining a lot of equity in the deal, so it was kind of in their best interest to do this. But this is one version we've seen of that before.
Yeah, and further to that, if they are freelancers and not officially W-2 employees in the States, I guess, will that be an issue? Like, does it depend on the size of the business, or does it depend on the type of the buyer? But to me, I would think that they would want more of a freelance rather than take employees. But I suppose that would depend on the size of the company, because if we're talking a $50 million company, obviously there are employees and there's probably like an office or whatever, like at that point. But typically, does it matter if they're does it make a business more or less attractive if they actually have employment status with the company, or if they're on a freelance basis?
That's a really good question. I think it depends on the role. So where it would add more value if it's C-suite, so corporate executive level, and they're full-time employees, or even fractional would actually work fine. But if they're management level and they're coming with corporate management level, if they're coming with the business, that's going to have an impact on value. But obviously your business needs to be profitable enough to support that C-suite. But as far as, like, if you've got a customer service person, having them freelance contractor or being a W-2 employee, I don't think that's really going to matter. The more fixed employees you have, the more liability you could have if it's an asset sale and they don't want the staff. So you'd have to figure out what to do with that. We've essentially, in legalese, you've seen this before, where essentially what they're trying to say in the term is, it's your problem, not mine. So you deal with all of that. So depending on your own contracts with your employees, that could be quite a significant amount of money or a significant amount of work to make everyone whole if in the event of a sale. But fortunately, you'll be getting a large chunk of money, so you'd probably just want to plan for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wasn't thinking C-suite. I was thinking more on an operations manager kind of level, an operations manager that deals with the virtual assistants that are kind of out. But I mean, you're right. If they are W-2 status with that company, there's a certain amount of liability that sort of comes with that might not be so attractive. However, if you're sourcing from like China or India or something, your operations manager is probably overseas and probably not an employee. So I don't know. I don't know how common
in that case,
that is.
if they are a key employee and they're W-2, that could be interesting because they're all in. That's their full-time job, right? It wouldn't really move the needle on multiple, but it might make the business more interesting compared to another business that doesn't have that. So yeah, it's worth. It's not the first thing I'd worry about though.
No, certainly.
In that case, I wouldn't switch people to freelance or specifically hire people as a W-2 employee instead. I wouldn't go to that level before selling because that's not really what's going to move the multiple in a general umbrella term.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this has come up a few times, and it has to do with the freelance contractors that they have or whatever, and maybe their motivation for selling is to move on and start another brand. And they have their systems that they've developed over time, and they've got like their process kind of streamlined, and they just want to repeat it. And they want to keep these freelancers in the business. They want to sort of take them with them. And I think my only response to that, to the answer to this question, would be that they're freelancers. The operative part of that word is free. They're free to do whatever they want. They can go with you or they can not go with you. The choice isn't yours to make. The choice is theirs. But typically freelancers have more than one client, and you're going to have to honor a non-compete. So if you're starting a brand in a completely different category, then there isn't really any issue. They could work for both, given that they have a time. I mean, if they're a full-time virtual assistant in that brand, then realistically it's up to the freelancer if they want to come with you or if they want to stay in the brand. It's not up to the buyer and it's not up to the seller. I mean, they're just available to work for anybody. That's the whole point of being a freelancer. So it's not really something that you can take with you. Like, it's not, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of the way the question was phrased. Like, I want to take them with me. And I'm like, well, they're not slaves. You don't own them.
Well, hopefully not.
Well, yeah, hopefully not. But I mean, yeah, they're freelancers. They're free to work for multiple clients. They're free to work for whoever. And if you're not, if you're honoring your non-compete and you're starting a brand in an unrelated category, then that freelancer is free to add you as a client and work for both. But yeah, I mean, it's not going to be. It can't really be a deal breaker if a freelancer doesn't come with the business, because they're free to make that choice themselves. You have to sort of like, they're available and the SOPs are in place is I think the key there is that if you've got your VA to make and update and keep that living SOP document rolling all the time, and so that all of that functionality is current and it's laid out in an easy to read format, that if the buyer loses that VA, it's easily replaceable because that SOP is already there and somebody could easily fill that role. Because like I said, that freelancer is free to not go with the business because you don't have any control over that.
Yeah. We have seen this on a couple of deals in the past, and I'm just trying to think like what would be the most relevant to this. So outside of founders, which rarely transition with the business unless there's a compelling reason to, we have seen CFO or operator type levels be off the table. So this key staff member needs to be replaced. And there's a training and handover expectation that they'll train the replacement. You may find, if it's freelancers, like you said, specifically the external freelancers, what they may be thinking is, well, I want them to come full time with me to the new thing. So if you're wanting that, you might want to replace them beforehand, Because if they're working full-time in your current business and you want them to work full-time for you, unless they're up for a double shift work week, that might get a little bit tricky. So I guess in some respect, the buyer wouldn't want you poaching the staff. But if you're upfront about it and say, look, this key person I want to take with me, the real important thing is transition and training SOPs, like you said. If you have a training plan in place and say, look, we'll find a replacement, train them up, that'll be fine. But yeah, it sends the wrong message if you say, I've built this great business, I've got this team, but they're so good, I'm going to keep all of them. It just kind of sends a weird message. So yeah, I'd have a transition plan. And if possible, like you said, well, if they're freelancers, they could do both. If they're not full-time, then that's probably fine. And they might already have other clients, like you said. So you might be competing with their other clients now, but yeah.
But I guess, like, have the conversation, and the idea is to make the business as attractive as possible. And one of the ways to do that is to make it as transferable as possible. And so you need to kind of have those things on the table. So because it could be a negotiating point. And if you're unwilling to let your freelancers go, then, that might be an issue. So just be flexible. And if you think that, like a buyer might want them, so have those conversations, get those SOPs ready, and be prepared for either scenario, either you looking for a new VA and having to train them up to be able to run your business, or being able to train somebody to replace the VA that's going to go with the business.
Yeah. And then there's the other side of it where the contractor or freelancer might really love the brand. We've dealt with some companies recently where the brand is just really cool. People love the brand, and they might want to keep working on it. So I don't know, have that conversation. They might not want your scientific instruments that your business that you're going to start building. They might not want to be a part of it. Who knows? Like you said, they're freelancers for a reason. But hopefully that's a few different ways to think about that question.
Shifting gears, though, here's a good question that sort of came up. And is there any value in the owner sort of creating a detailed POA or plan of action for an investor? We had this discussion yesterday, and you brought up a couple of good points about that's great, but it doesn't really do anything. There's really no meat and guts to that. And that's great that you have a plan. Everyone's got a plan. My plan is to have a $10 million business, but is it achievable? You need to be a bit more granular than that, and really be able to go down sort of month by month. But if you can just sort of reiterate how you explained it to me about having, getting monthly projections and forecasting would really help more than just a plan of action. So the question was posed, like, does having a POA move the needle? Does it make the business in a better position for a sale?
Yeah. So a plan of action or a game plan of how you would grow the business helps. You want that. But it's not going to move the multiple. It's not going to make the valuation any better, make your business stand out. On any listing you see in this space in the e-commerce world, especially FBA, they'll say the listing. Sorry.
Oh, here we go.
Lunch didn't go down well. It'll say, like, maybe they're just selling in the US, for example. Expansion opportunities international are infinite. You could get on Walmart. You could sell through your own website. There's a Shopify website built. It's there ready for you to drive traffic to sell teaspoons, right? It's a teaspoon business. No one's buying teaspoons direct unless they're commemorative, I'm guessing, right? So it's a plan, but it's not. It's almost an option. Like, here's something you could do. But what does move the needle, and what you started to allude to, is something like financial projections. As boring as that sounds, if you work with, and I'd suggest getting some help with this, like a fractional CFO, a high-level accountant that understands inventory-based businesses, to build a projection for your business, a financial projection forecast, and review it monthly. The reason you want to review it monthly is you want to tweak it. And the longer you've done this over time, the more reliable that will be. If you can show 2, 3, 4 quarters of hitting or exceeding, and like I said yesterday, you don't actually want to go too far above or beyond. That's the same, above or below. You kind of want that to be fairly consistent with your projection. If it is, then, and you have a history of doing that, the buyer's going to have more confidence that that is going to happen in the future. Because it's been done before. Whereas launching in Europe or the UK and you sell in the US, it's a complete unknown. It actually costs them more money to do that because you've got to ship inventory over there, right? But this projection thing and forecasting, hey, we've been doing this for years and we're pretty on the money when it comes to what's happening next, and here's what we think is going to happen and here's why. That's interesting because no one does projections in the FBA world at all, because sometimes they just don't know. And that's okay too. We worked with our CFO on our projections, and I had these questions for him in my business, which is a consulting business, completely different to inventory, but it's kind of the same because the future is kind of unknown, right? So we control these things, we don't control these things. And we came up with a plan and we've been tweaking and adjusting it. It's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, let's do that. With an inventory-based business, same thing. You want to say, here's what we think is going to happen. You can look at last year, you can use benchmarks, you can predict, but have a running living document and check in regularly, at least monthly. We have some clients that do less than monthly, which is kind of crazy. They know down to the day what they're supposed to be doing, but at least monthly. So you can tweak and present this. This is going to move the needle on value because you can actually use some of that forecast. If it's really reliable, you can use some of that forecast for your multiple. It's really hard to do that if you don't have a history of a forecast. You can't just create one and say, this is what's going to happen, Mr. Buyer. No one's going to buy that.
Yeah. No one's got that crystal ball. If we did, everybody would be rich. Okay, so last question here, because this will probably take us to the end of our half an hour, but current situation with coronavirus, we've talked about how it's been affecting the market. We've talked about things that we've seen, both surprising and not. But this is coming from somebody who's probably planning an exit, let's say for 2 years from now, and COVID has perhaps unrealistically boosted their sales for this year. Okay, so they've been trugging along, and all of a sudden, boom. So if they were to sell next year, looking at the trailing 12 months, will a buyer see that as an inflated anomaly? And is it better for them to not sell on the backs of 2020 with the COVID situation and perhaps wait another year to either prove that that wasn't just a one-off or give an accurate snapshot of the growth a trajectory of the business and say, okay, that was a spike and then it crashed, but overall, here's the trend?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. And it's something that the way I'd think about this if I was the investor, which is probably the best way to think about it, is from the buyer's shoes. I would be thinking, what's the distance between the uptick and what's happening now? So let's say your target market's in Austin, and which is a little bit granular for our clients, but just roll with it. Gyms have opened back up already. So if you're in the sports, home and fitness equipment space and you saw a spike because people had to work out at home, but now gyms are opening back up, you'd want to track your sales from that point. So here's what's happened when someone couldn't go to the gym. Here's what happened when they could go to the gym. And the longer that distance is, the more reliable that will be. There's a theme here, right? with history. So whatever that spike is, and it might be in a different area, a different country, it might be longer. It might be, say in the UK, they're not opening gyms back up yet. So it might need to be a 6-month window of people working out at home, and then another 6 months of what's the new normal, and then a bit beyond that. So it's kind of hard to tell until there's a counterbalance to the trend. So I'd want to see the counterbalance ideally, and then I'd want to see some distance from it. And the more distance, the better. So generally speaking, if the issue was 3 or 4 months while COVID was happening, and then the rest of 2020, your sales kept increasing, and that became the new normal, then you've got 6 months of saying, well, yes, COVID did increase my business, but it's actually continued growing, and here's why. And that might make sense. It depends on the category, and it depends on the timing. I wouldn't necessarily right now say wait an extra year if you're ready to sell. I'd look at it around the time you're wanting to sell, and that's how I'd think about it: is what's the trend, what's changed, what's going to change, and did it go back? Which I think personally, I think more people are going to buy online now. I think across the board, there's just going to be more consumers wanting to buy online. But whether that carries through for every category, we'll have to wait and see.
But I think too that it's going to be the that's where like the big year over year is going to come into play, right? So like if somebody's looking at selling like in August and there was a huge spike, so the business was trugging along and then there was a huge spike at the beginning of the year and then there was a crash down to like August on the other end of that spike. But it's like, okay, well, is August 2020 better than August 2019? Like there's your benchmark. Yes, there was a spike, but how far did it come back down? And if August is better this year than it was last year, then there's still that year over year growth pattern, and they can kind of discount that spike. But the longer that spike goes on, like if this is, who knows? Like if this is a 1 year like spike, then I don't know. But anyway, that's kind of the way I see it too. Is that when it does come back down, how far does it come back down, and is that month still better than the same month in the previous year? Because that's the year over year growth pattern, and they'll just the spike was the spike.
Yeah. Well, we actually have this, even for a real example right now, we have this on an 8-figure deal we're working on right now. So the last 2 months have been massively up from last year. So we didn't normalize that. We discussed it with the buyers, and the ones that we're about to sign with, hopefully today, got it. They're like, great, awesome, business is up. There's other factors around this one. It's not just like the gym example. There's a genuine groundswell behind this category, and they love it. They're leaning into that. I wouldn't do a deal if someone was instantly discounting something unnecessarily, right? But yeah, like we've said, the longer the distance, the better. But even right now, we're able to say, well, you might see it that way, but this buyer over here might see it differently. Right. So, and that's the value of comparison, having multiple buyers in play, multiple offers, multiple structures, especially for something like this, because you can, if 5-6 buyers all say the same thing, well, okay, maybe, but you might get one asshole buyer that just says, I want to pay nothing and I'll give you 15% up close or something. And another one might give you a really good offer. So yeah, comparison.
Right. Got it. Cool. Well, that sort of takes us up to our 30 minutes there, just like I thought. So, But again, if there's any questions that you have throughout the week, please drop them into the comments, and we will get to those. And that's it.
Awesome.
That's all.
So yeah, just quickly before we let people know how to get in touch, I just wanted to reiterate FBAscorecard.com. If you are thinking about selling your business and wondering how it would sit relative to other businesses that have sold in the past 12 months, we put together FBA Scorecard. It's a scorecard and a video training for you of how to implement and translate this into your business. Really short scorecard, 5 points, where you can go through. There's little stories on each one to kind of triangulate where your business is and where you might want to improve or not improve, but just be aware of how your business would stack up relative to the market.
Cool.
Yeah. And how can people reach out if they'd like to talk to us, Jeff?
So sales@thefbabroker.com. best email to use. Come straight to me. And if you've got plans to sell, if you just want to see where you might be in the market, if you want to talk about how to improve the value of your business and talk about an exit plan sometime down the road, please reach out, sales@thefbabroker.com. Let me know what your plans are. We'll arrange a time to chat and see where we can be of help.
Awesome. Cool. Well, have a great weekend, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. And thank you, Jeff, for jumping on the call.
Not a problem. Bye for now.